welcome to Strategic Edge, a podcast by leaders and for leaders. We're here to inform, instruct, and inspire leaders. We're going to share information about business models, about theories, but then we're also going to provide instructions. How do you apply those? How do you make them very practical? And finally, we're going to encourage you to act. My name is Ted Davis. I'll be your podcast host and your leadership coach. I have been a practitioner, a student, and a teacher of leadership now for nearly 60 years. And as my future guests and I inform, instruct, and inspire you, I encourage you to do three things. First of all, absorb what we share with you. Make it your own. Take it on. Take notes. Make it your own thoughts. Make it part of what you now believe about leadership. Number two, reflect on it. What does it mean to you? What do we affirm that you're already doing? What ideas do you pick up about how to improve? And then thirdly, we want you to commit. Commit to an action plan so you can continue to move forward. So we want you to absorb, reflect, and commit. And with that, let's start today's podcast. Welcome to today's podcast. I hope you had a chance to listen to the last episode where Dr. Chris Auker talked about servant leadership. And that's a topic I want to get into and look at further in future podcasts because I think it's an important and very popular leadership model. And I'd like to make sure we understand what that means. But one of the things that Chris talked about was he referred to a wonderful book entitled Leadership Challenge by Kouzes and Posner. I'd like to talk about that today because I think it's a great model. They have 5 practices that they go through. So I want to take a look at those, and I highly recommend that you read this book. But let me give you kind of a summary and hopefully inspire you to look at it. So one of the things I love about the book, the first edition, I think it was published in 1995, great edition. I still treasure that above all other updates to the book. But the second chapter, I think, really has a important starting point as we look at leadership and understanding the 5 practices that they're going to talk about. And in chapter 2, they really go to length talking about credibility and what is it and how do we establish it. And what they found, this is the neat thing about the book, and I think Chris referred to it as the book is very research-based. They did a lot of surveys since the very first edition, and I think it was 95, but since then, they've done a lot of research to continually track what they're having to say, because they have tracked that the number one characteristic that's desired in most countries, and certainly here in the United States, that followers want from their leaders is honesty. So honesty, competence, being inspiring, forward-looking, those were the top characteristics that people rated what they looking for in their leaders. And so that led the Kouzes and Posner to what they call their laws of leadership, 2 of them. And the first one is if you don't believe the messenger, you won't believe the message. Yeah, I think that's really important. Let me just read it again. If you don't believe the messenger, you won't believe the message. I think that is so important for us as leaders to understand. If our people don't trust us, if we don't earn credibility in their eyes, they're not going to trust us. And thinking about this, what I've seen over a lifetime of leadership, they're going to be people who are so burdened by some negative experience that no matter what we do, we probably cannot, in any short order or any midterm, like 2 or 3 years, earn their trust or be seen as credible in their eyes because they are so laden with a disappointment, with what they perceive to have been poor leadership before, and they take what they thought of former leaders, 3 or 4 that were not very good, and then they come in with an opinion and they superimpose it upon us. But nonetheless, we must seek to demonstrate that we have credibility, because when we're seen as being credible. In other words, we have earned their trust because we have walked the talk, which leads to their second law of leadership is do what you say you will do. So those are the two laws of leadership, according to the authors. Number one, if you don't believe the messenger, you're not going to believe the message. And secondly, do what you say you will do. Critical things to earn trust and credibility. The fascinating thing about that is, trust is given to us. Being trustworthy is a character thing. It starts within me. Am I worthy of your trust? Because I walk the talk. I do what I say I'm going to do. So I may be worthy of it. That doesn't mean that the trust will be extended by the others because our intent doesn't guarantee another person's inference. So we can be acting with the utmost integrity. Really, truly, our walk matches our talk. So there's two things, what we say, what we do, two action verbs in that principle. But again, what we intend doesn't guarantee their inference. And so even though we are trustworthy, they may not extend trust because trust is given by another person. Trust, I love the definition if you look at Patrick Lencioni's material as he talks about trust. Trust is being vulnerable to another person's intentions, to another person's decisions and so forth. So people are not going to extend that vulnerability. They're not going to make themselves vulnerable to our intentions as a leader until they come to the conclusion, yes, we are trustworthy. So that's why I think these two principles, these two laws by Kouzes and Posner are so important. So again, if you don't believe the messenger, you won't believe the message. So they've got to believe in us. We must be able to show that we have the honesty, the integrity, the competence, and that we're forward looking. I think they've got to conclude, and I'm sure you've heard it many times, they're not going to believe you until they believe that you are worthy of it. It's that old adage of people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. That's kind of a variation of that. So, and then of course, the second law that I mentioned, do what you say you will do. So that was, I think, an important part of the model of this book. And as I said, the authors list what they call 5 fundamentals, and then with them are 2 commitments for each one of them. So let's take a look at some of those 5 fundamentals and what they are. The 5 fundamentals, just to cite them, is model the way. Number 2, inspire a shared vision. Number 3, challenge the process. 4, enable others to act. And number 5, encourage the heart. Let's take a look at those a little bit. I love what the authors have to say about modeling the way. That's what they think is number 1. It's interesting that in the first version back in about 95, so the first edition, modeling the way was actually number 3. Challenging the process was number 1. And in the rewrites, they decided, and I think they were really right in doing this, modeling the way. I think all 5 of these have to be done simultaneously. They're not a sequence, do 1, then do 2, 3. No. They absolutely, all 5 of them should be done simultaneously. But nonetheless, what's kind of the start point? And I think the start point, again, is us, leaders. So we have to be able to model the way. What they write is exemplary leaders know that if they want to gain commitment and achieve the highest standards, they must model the behavior they expect of others. So it starts with us. Absolutely. So they talk about the deeds are far more important than words when constituents want to determine how serious leaders really are about what they say. So again, it's just like they said in their second law, it's what are we doing? We can say one thing, but are absolutely doing it. There are 2 commitments under this idea of modeling the way. Again, the modeling of the way is a practice. The 2 commitments under it. Number 1, clarify values by finding your voice and affirming shared values. So we've got to be able to clarify, to model the way, we've got to be clear about what are our value. We have to be clear internally, but we've got to be clear as we build relationships with with others. That's the other thing that the authors stress in their discussion of credibility is that about the fact that leadership is a relationship. Cannot escape that. Leadership is always about the relationship. And excuse me, in a relationship, I think the two key ingredients is we've got to be able to communicate effectively and instilling trust. Those two things are so inseparable. We have to do them simultaneously. And so, excuse me, we have to clarify our values internally and then clarify them with our people and what's the organization that we're dealing with. Hopefully the organization has one. I'm going through this right now. I decided to come out of retirement. Somebody was offering me a position as chief operating officer for a not-for-profit in Kansas City, Kansas. And after saying no 3 times, and I finally felt the call, finally felt like, okay, that's how the Lord's leading my life at this moment. So I came out of the retirement. I've taken this position as a chief operating officer. It's going to be thrilling. I think it's going to be far more exciting than I first had given it consideration of. But one of the things that I did in my first meeting was clarify that I absolutely bought into and I believe in the values and in the goals and everything about the business model, the organizational culture, the company I'm working with now. They had written a very clear organizational culture document. It outlined the history of the organization, what it contributed to the culture, what its business model is, what it contributes to the culture. What did the employees want in the culture? And it influenced the document. And so in the document, it went far beyond just simply here's our organizational values. And the key part, every organization should do that, be very clear about what your organizational values are. But then we also said, hey, here's what we want you to think, feel, and perceive about fellow employees, about the clientele, everything about the organization. Anyway, I'll save that for a future discussion on organizational culture. But getting back to this commitment, clarifying your values, that was right out of my mouth. Start day one as I took the position, met with all the staff. Let me share with you, I absolutely affirm, support, and will live by the culture that the organization has described for itself. So I was affirming what I believe the shared values are because that's what the organization has defined. Now I have a voice to be able to say that, and I outlined why I believed in those things. The second commitment to the model way is set the example by aligning actions with the shared values. So that means that we have to really remain aware of what we're doing and how it compares to what the organization has stated this is what we value. So two things, I think every organization ought to have organizational values clearly defined, and that everybody should be aligning with it. But it ought to be a short list. I'd say somewhere between 3 to 6, and broad enough statements that encompasses quite a bit of behavior that needs to be aligned with that. If you get too lengthy, people aren't going to be remembering it. So a short list with crisply stated values are going to be important to the organization. But then we as leaders, we have to model the way because just as the authors say, we have to do what we say. So if you say, as I did, I believe in these values, this is what I'm going to live by, now they're all watching. Are you actually doing that? Are you actually living by and fulfilling those values? So I have to be a model of not only their values, but of course, the principles that have guided mine. So I gave them a clear understanding of kind of my personal definition of leadership, about how I see the world, and tried to make sure that they understood where my heart is and how I want to move the organization forward, working with them and trying to establish that the part of that credibility. So those are my words. Now it's doing the same thing. So Posner's first commitment is model the way. The second, inspire a shared vision. Again, I think these are going to be simultaneous. So as I'm taking this position as the chief operating officer, the organization already has a vision, and I clearly stated, but this is our mission, and this is how we're going to fulfill it. here's the vision, here's what the future looks like. Let me help you understand my vision of what I need to accomplish with you in order to move us towards mission fulfillment and fulfilling the vision statement. And so I outlined four goals that I have. It's a way of, again, telling them where my heart is and setting a vision for what we're going to be working on. And so I said, number one, we need to increase our effectiveness. Number two, we need to enhance our efficiencies. Number three, we need to make it an enticing organization. We've got to make it enticing to high quality professionals to want to join us. And then number four is make it an enduring company. How do we endure long term? How do we do that? And I'll come back to that in a few minutes when we talk about challenge the process, because that's what we have to do is put processes in place. So again, leaders must envision a future by imagining exciting and ennobling possibilities. I love that, what the authors have to say. It's exciting and then it's ennobling. Well, I like to think whether you're for profit or not for profit, for profits can have an ennobling possibility as much as not for profit. Every organization, I think I may have covered it in one of my previous podcasts, but I firmly believe every organization exists to deliver something of value to the marketplace. Every organization, whether you're profit or for profit or not for profit, you exist to deliver something of value to the marketplace. So in inspiring a shared vision, what is that we are going to deliver of value, and why is it beneficial? What is it that makes it beneficial to the marketplace? And we've got to be able to appreciate the past and have a very clear image of what the results we're looking for as we look into the future. I love what the authors have to say. In times of change and uncertainty, people want to follow those who can see beyond today's difficulty and imagine a brighter tomorrow. Isn't that all of our organizations? All of our organizations have some sort of change. And certainly in this period of our history, we're kind of divided into two camps, unfortunately. Man, a lot of challenges with inflation and marketing and all the other stuff that goes with it. So we've got to be able to cast a vision that is bright and says, this is what it's working for. This is what we're working for. Here's the positive outcomes we're going to work towards. So leaders forge unity of purpose by showing their constituents, meaning our employees, how to dream in a shared dream. What are we looking at together? So the two commitments under this inspiring and shared vision is envision a future by imagining exciting and ennobling possibilities. Number two is enlist others in a common vision by appealing to their shared aspirations. That takes time. You've got to be able to get to know people. What are their aspirations? What is their reason for being in their craft, whatever that field is within your organization? Do they clearly understand the significance of their role? Every position is there for a reason. If there's no reason why you hired somebody, why in the world do you have them there? So I would suggest that if you're paying somebody, it's because of the position is necessary. And whether it's the custodian who's taking care of everybody who works there, now that's an important job, taking care of everybody else, enabling others to come to a healthy work physically, the physical plant where they're coming to. Man, that's an important role to empower them to do a good job. So custodian, I don't want to say is a low job, but it's certainly an indirect. The custodian is not necessarily going to have a direct line to your profitability, but nonetheless, that's an important job. So you've got to understand, okay, help them understand, and you've got to understand what is it that person aspires to do. So we need to envision that future, make it exciting and ennobling, and number two, enlist people in a common vision by appealing to their shared aspirations. The third fundamental, according to the authors, is that we challenge the process. And again, when they first wrote the book, that was their number one thing. Now it's number three, and I think it's for a good reason. Again, they're all going to happen simultaneously, but our minds think linearly, so we think in sequence. And if you got to think, okay, how do I get started? Well, of course, you start with, as I said, number one was model the way. You got to start by you model the way, then you inspire people with a shared vision, and in doing that, you got to challenge the process. Processes are incredibly important. As I mentioned, my goal for this company is that we be an enduring company, and that means that we document our systems. We be very clear. What are the systems that produce value? We know what the value is we're delivering to the marketplace. We know that, but it's going to take a lot of processes to get there. And what I'm finding is not all of them are documented. And if you don't document them so you can integrate new people, so you can hold it to our standards, so if you don't have the systems in place, you're certainly not going to have the key performance indicators that are going to measure whether or not you are successful. And those are vital to understanding how well you're doing, so you can make corrections and so forth. So you've got to be able to understand, what are my systems, and challenge those. You got to challenge them, because it's easy to become fixated. We've done this, and how many times have you heard that? Oh, we've done it like this for forever. We've done it for the last 10 years, or whatever it is. Wow. The outside world changes, and every organization has got to be able to be flexible enough to, again, change internally to meet external situations, external demands. Because your customer buyer behavior, that's not going to stay fixated. They're going to change. The customer's going to change. Where do they buy? When do they buy it? How do they buy it? Where do they buy it? And how much are they willing to pay? That will change over time. For some products and some services, it'll change rapidly. Others, it'll take a long time. But nonetheless, they're going to change. Your competition is going to change. The political, social, economic, technological environment's going to change. So the external environment is always going to change. We have to change internally. That means we have to challenge internally. How have we been doing this? What do we need to change? So the authors talk about innovation comes from listening more than telling. We got to listen. We have to listen to our people, what's working, what's not working. We have to listen to our customers, listen to our vendors. We really need to have an open ear, both inside and outside our organization. We have an open ear to understand what are the innovations? What are others doing to get ahead of us? And how do we adapt to that? But what changes are coming down that are going to limit how we lead and how we manage and what we can pay and all that stuff, that policies and regulations and so forth are going to come our way. So we need to listen to those and then search for the opportunities by seizing the initiative. We've got to be future thinking. We've got to anticipate, and then we've got to take the initiative to seize the opportunities. So we've got to seize the opportunities and look outward for those innovations to improve. Is the second commitment under challenge the process. Experiment and take risks by consistently generating small wins and learning from the experience. Experiment and take risks. Gosh, we can do all the research we want, but it doesn't guarantee everything. And you think you should. You got to think these things through, do a little research, see what others are doing. So just don't haphazardly experiment. Don't haphazardly take risks. They need to be calculated risks. But we have to make decisions with less than perfect information. So when we take those risks, when we take the chance, we got to experiment. And if it works, we got to celebrate it, but fine tune it. I love what the learning organization Peter Senge wrote several decades ago about being a learning organization. We have to learn from ourselves. So as we challenge the process, we've got to be studying what's working, what's not working, what am I learning from how we're producing something. So challenge the process, make yourself better. Don't accept that even if it's good, will it stay permanent, giving changes outside the organization? If it's not working, you got to change it rather quickly. And again, I think you've got to be able to talk with your people, listen to the market, listen to your people, listen to your vendors, and also listen to your competition. The fourth commitment then for leadership challenge is the name of the book, is enabling others. So leaders foster collaboration. Key thing, collaboration, by building trust and facilitating relationships. As I've already said, as the authors wrote, leadership is always about the relationship. It's not whether or not you have a relationship, it's the quality of the relationship. Is it a relationship where it's no engagement? I mean, that's a type of relationship. You're the boss, you've got people, you never talk to them, you never listen to them. It's like there's no relationship. Yes, there is. There's a relationship. It's just that it's a disconnected, it's an uncaring relationship. So there's always a relationship. The question becomes, what's the quality? And what we're looking for, obviously, in enabling others and fostering collaboration and building trust is we're looking for an engaged relationship. We're engaged with our people and hope, which causes them to be engaged with us. So we must engage to make our projects move forward. I love what the authors say. Focusing on serving others. This is why Chris Auger recommended it as part of servant leadership model. It says focusing on serving others' needs rather than our own builds trust. We need to understand, and I think it's so important, as the authors say, we have to understand their needs. I would say we also understand what are their wants. What do they want, but is the want really what they need? There are times where we've got to meet people's needs, even though we can't meet their wants. So we've got to understand the nature of the work. We've got to understand the nature of the economy that our people are working in. What are the conditions? What can we do to help them grow personally and professionally? So we've really got to understand their needs. So the two commitments, number one, foster collaboration by building trust, and facilitating relationships. Number one commitment. So we're enabling others. Number one commitment, foster collaboration. You've got to build trust. People are not going to collaborate with you. And collaboration, obviously, is a give and take. Something I do, something you're going to do, and as we work together, we're going to produce something great. It's different from coordination. Collaboration means that we're both taking risks. We're both putting in something to the formula for success. So we foster that by building trust and healthy relationships. Number two commitment, we strengthen others by increasing self-determination and developing competence. Enabling others by strengthening their self-determination. We've got to help people mature. We've got to help people succeed, because if they succeed and they know the limits of their authority, right? First, it's got to be clear. Here's your responsibility. Anytime we give people responsibility, I suggest we also must give them a commensurate amount of authority, the kind of authority they need to make the decisions. We don't give them carte blanche, you can do whatever you want. No. What are your responsibilities and how much authority do you need to be able to do that? Unfortunately, sometimes we give them the responsibility. We don't give them any resources or not enough authority as a resource that they can make decisions and move the organization forward. When I used to teach on the public seminars with American Management Association, 5 cities, 5 days, interesting work, but boy, it got tiring pretty quick. Anyways, I was teaching leadership, and we'd go over the subjects. It was amazing how many people talked about I have all the responsibility, but none of the authority. Everything goes wrong is my fault, but I can't hire, I can't fire, I can't reward, I can't do anything, but yet you're going to hold me accountable. Oh my gosh, that doesn't strengthen our people. And so, and to enable others, this commitment of strengthening others means we've got to be able to give them both the responsibility and a commensurate amount of authority that enables them to get it. So they have some self-determination. They can start to anticipate problems and start to take corrective actions. And if we have defined healthy boundaries of authority for each position, they ought to know when do they need to come to us to get permission or to get feedback or just to get some coaching and mentoring about how to move forward. And then the second part of the same commitment is that we develop their competence. We develop their competence, I think, obviously, in training and education. Training somebody for the immediate job, educating them for the long-term service to the company, and then we got to give them timely, meaningful feedback. That's how we develop competency. One, we got to clearly know the job. We got to make sure that we understand what are the resources, what are the skill sets, what are the places, what's the collaboration. We have to understand the job and then fully equip our people with information, with tools, the equipment, and so forth, and the authority to accomplish what we set out to do. The last of the five commitments from the book, Leadership Challenge, is encouraging the heart. Now, remember, these all happen simultaneously. This is not a sequence. You don't do the first four and then get to encouraging the heart. You got to do this throughout. As you're doing the others, you still got to do this as well. Encouraging the heart. Leaders recognize contributions by showing appreciation. One of the things I've seen over the years is that how many leaders misconstrue performance management to think it's just the event of an annual feedback, an annual performance review. And those are oftentimes mishandled. Good performance management starts with thank you. Thank you. That's a good job. I mean, good performance management is a daily thing, not an annual thing. We may culminate with an annual review, but we've got to do it daily. So we've got to appreciate and let people know. And we've got to be very specific about here's the outcome and know the effort that went into it. When we can recognize here's what you accomplished and I know what you did to get there, that is so much more powerful. But it's got to be both. We've got to have, we can appreciate the effort, but if it didn't get the results that were necessary, hey, it didn't get the results. Be honest with each other. Hey, I appreciate the effort, but we didn't get the job done. Let's get back. What did we do wrong? What are we going to change? We must be effective. Then we can talk about the effort, but it is good to recognize both of them. So the two commitments that the authors talk about there are number one, recognize contributions by appreciating individual excellence by name. Who is that? I encourage you, make that a daily practice. Who can I say thank you to? Who can I go around and say, hey, good job today? Hey, I'm proud of what you did today. That was just a super neat job. I just appreciate your contributions. Then do it monthly, do it semi-annually. My personal technique is that once a month, I want to have my two things. One early in the month is what I call performance and accountability review. I've seen a lot of clients use this. And that's the employee comes in and they say, here's my projects. Here's what I'm working on. Here's where the status is. Here's where I'm making progress. Here's where I'm struggling. It's them being accountable, them telling and then saying, hey, they tell me, what do they need help in? Then about 2 weeks later, sometime later in the month, it's performance feedback. Now it's me giving them feedback. And I like to write it out. And that way they have a record. I think it's important to do that because that's why it's historical. There's a document there. There's over time, there's a track record that they and I can refer to. So I like to just simply state what's going well, how I applaud their motivation or their values of the company and so forth. My technique, but I encourage you to have some event on a monthly basis, a little sit down, 5 minutes. It can even be done in the hall if you're only going to do it verbally, but let them know what's getting done and what's the effort that you're applauding. So to do that, again, recognize the contribution by showing appreciations. Number two, celebrate the value and victories by creating a spirit of community. Some years ago, I had a speaker come in and talk to the CEO group that I was facilitating, and he was talking about this whole subject of recognition and how to personalize it. And he was recognizing his sales team. That was his kind of case study as he was showing us techniques. And he found that one of his salespeople really loved playing the piano. And so they set up, that big, BHAG, big, hairy, audacious goal. They had a huge one. I mean, really millions and millions of dollars. And this guy, the sales guy, met it. And so how did they recognize it? Oh, they bought him a piano. Pretty significant because the guy had contributed so much. And I'm not suggesting you go out and buy a piano for everybody, but certainly figure out what is a meaningful recognition. How do we celebrate that with people? And whether it's a simple thing like taking them to lunch, some sort of public ceremony, but recognize what people are done. So these five commitments: model the way, inspire a shared vision, challenge the process, enable others to act, and encourage the heart. I really encourage you to look at the book. As a matter of fact, as we wrap up today's podcast, I always want to have three practical tips, three things you can do. How do you make this real? The number one thing I recommend you do, tip number one for this podcast: develop a personal, professional reading program. You got to have it. If you go back and look at episode number one, I talked about that as leaders, we are professional. We've got to be professional leaders, and that there's a body of knowledge called leadership, and we ought to be studying it. So to study it, to grow, have a personal development plan, and make a personal reading plan part of it. I would recommend you set a goal of reading at least 6 professional books annually, at least. So number one, develop your plan. Write that down. Write down your list. By the way, if you would like a recommended reading list, send me a text, 913-306-1499. Just say, please send a reading list, and I'll send you my recommended reading list. The second thing I'd recommend is make Reading Leadership Challenge number one book. Have that lead your list. I often tell people that if you're only going to read one book on leadership, that is a mistake. But if you choose to make that mistake, read the Leadership Challenge. So I really believe this is a great book, and that's why I wanted to take time today to talk about it. So number one, develop your professional reading list. Number two, at the top of that list, read Leadership Challenge. Number three, what I recommend you do is assess your level of credibility. So important to know how credible are you? Have you established with other people that they trust you? Have you instilled trust? Trust, credibility, I think they overlap. So assess your credibility. You either use a self-assessment, sit down and think through what are the things, and what am I saying? What am I doing? Are they matching? Kind of do a personal reflection on it. That's a good thing to do. Also think about how you might get feedback from others. Who can do a survey for you? If you want some ideas, again, send me a text, and I'll share some ideas with you about how you can do a self-assessment as well as getting feedback from others. Again, if you want to send me a text on feedback as well as requesting a recommended reading list or how to get feedback on your credibility or other aspects of your leadership, my phone number, 913-306-1499. Thanks for listening today. I'll see you on our next episode. Now we've got 3 ideas of what to share from today's podcast. So again, what I'd like for you to be able to do is take those ideas, make them your own, reflect on them. What do they mean to you? And then thirdly, commit to an action plan. Commit to actions that you can take to apply what we've talked about today. If you want help, if you want some ideas, if you want some accountability, please contact me. Contact me by sending me a text, 913-306-1499. Put podcast follow-up in the text message, and I'll get back to you within 24 hours. Thank you so much for listening today, and I'll see you on our next broadcast.